Well, good afternoon. I'm Richard Hill. I'm a partner with Mitchell Emmert Hill, a CPA firm in Knoxville. We do the audit on the internal school funds of Anderson County and have for several years, a long time. In addition to Anderson, we audit 13 other school systems. All total, we audit 135 schools, and we've been doing those since 1993, I believe. So we've got quite a bit of experience in school audits. We did a session for the bookkeepers back in May, I believe it was, and got into the nuts and bolts with them about the mechanics of what's required and why they do it and all that, and that was a good session. But today I was going to focus probably on the little bit bigger picture issues that primarily would concern principals. So before we get started in that, I always like opening these sessions with a little humor. And so there was a teacher that was a real joker, and she came into class and said, we'll only have a half a day of school this morning, and everybody celebrated, and she said, we'll have the other half this afternoon. So, just one. I've got 3 or 4 written down, but I won't do that. So as I thought about what I wanted to say, I think we'll do this like a good news, bad news type thing. And so we'll start off with the bad news, all this to try to set the environment that you operate in. So I learned a couple of weeks ago, let me back up and give you some history. Julie Minton and I actually worked together at the Comptroller of the Treasury Office in 1980, something or the other. But anyway, so it was a few years ago. And at that time, the policy was if you were auditing and you encountered fraud, which we occasionally did in auditing counties, then you just work through it. And
hey, let me say, those are not from county funds. Those are from trust funds. That's what made me.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. So anytime we ran into something like that, whoever happened to be in charge of that audit would just work through it till the end, get a little help from the supervisor, the manager in the area, but generally you're out there on your own. So they finally kind of wised up toward the end of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s and created a division of investigations, I think is what their name is, and started with just 2 or 3 people that did that type work when they weren't busy doing other type work. So I learned about 2 weeks ago they now have a staff of 43, and that covers the entire state of Tennessee. So they go out and hire people, not just CPAs, but they actually want certified fraud examiners. So they go to fraud school to learn how to identify fraud and how to work through that. So that's the environment out there. I talked to one of them this morning about something that we're involved with. We turned over to them last October, and they're just now working on it. So there's 43 investigators, and they're about a year behind getting started at looking at cases that are turned over. I think there are probably some that are more sensitive that may get pushed to the top of the pile, but the routine thefts, they just get pushed down and get done in the order that they're received. They have a website that has got a lot of good information on it, the Department of Investigations or Division of Investigations. So if you go on there, they have like a real interactive map of the state of Tennessee, and you can click in a county. They'll show you, they've got different flags and symbols that mean different things. An investigation's been completed, there was fraud, there wasn't fraud, they don't talk about what's in process. And then you can go back, at least 10 years and find reports they've issued. And so one of the ways I try to make sure we stay on our toes in doing the work we do is that I'll go read those investigative reports because I want to know what somebody did to see if that's something we should have caught in our audit procedures. So this isn't exact, but I would be willing to bet half of the fraud investigation reports that are issued are done on schools or school support organizations. And that's sobering. Now, occasionally a city, a utility district, a county, sometimes a not-for-profit agency, but by and large they're schools and school support organizations. Okay, why is that? I thought to myself. And I think there are 2 reasons. One is you don't necessarily have degreed accountants out there managing your money that serve in that bookkeeper role. You get a lot of cash in, and there's just not the formal oversight that your business office has or that a utility district would have or a business would have. And so it's kind of ripe for that kind of irregularity to take place. So that's really what I want to get you to focus on today as part of this presentation. So why is that important? We're still in the good news part of this session. But anyway, why is that important? I'm sorry, we're in the bad news section. It's important because under state law, the principals are personally liable for any money that's missing in internal school funds. So if I'm a principal, and I'm not, and I don't have the skills to be a principal, but if I'm a principal and I'm personally liable for something, I'm going to spend a little bit of time making sure things are done right. So again, at a 10,000 foot level, as I was driving out here, I thought, well, what are some of those examples? So there are three things that I would do if I were the principal over internal school funds. The first thing is when you sign checks, you absolutely have to look at all the supporting documentation that's down there that should be with the check you're asked to sign. If signing a check was just the mechanics of getting a signature on a check, we got laser printers that can do that. So you're not signing that just because it has to have your name on it. You're signing it as a control procedure that says, I've looked at the supporting documentation, I've looked at the invoice and it's legitimate. Either sales tax has been charged or it hasn't been. There's a purchase order, or hopefully there's a purchase order. If there was a bid, then there's a bid. The fund that's buying this has the money to cover this bill, and we're not going to create a fund deficit. Once you've done all that, then you sign the check. So if you're signing checks while you're in a Zoom call, or you're signing checks while you're doing something else and not paying careful attention to that, you're setting yourself up for a problem. So that would be the first thing I would do, is very carefully look at everything you're asked to sign that involves a check going out of internal school funds. The second procedure that's equally, if not more important, is this manual that we'll talk about a little bit later requires that someone review each month all the income and expenses for every account in the school. So for a principal, you would review the general fund because nobody's sponsored the general fund. And then if you have restricted funds, like in sports, you have an athletic director, you have a beta club sponsor, cheerleading sponsor, whatever, then those people would review their account. If I'm the principal, I'm still going to review it behind them though, but at a minimum, they've got to review their own account. Then the principal reviews any account that doesn't have a sponsor, and the general fund. I would also not do that while you're in the middle of a Zoom call or trying to do something else and multitask, and I'm a chronic multitasker, and so I get it. What you're looking for there is something that doesn't look right, that just sticks out and raises a question, and we'll have some examples of that. And then the third thing I'd do as a principal, if I were in your shoes, is just be aware of what's going on in the school, which I think most of you are, all of you are, and apply that to what you see in the accounting records. So my first war story that I want to offer up is a real life case. None of these took place in Anderson County. But as far, well, yeah, you're right. I don't know that any of these have taken place in Anderson County. So at a middle school, I think it was, the school bookkeeper's in the office and looks out the window, similar to what you've got back here, and notices the cheerleaders are selling donuts. And she thought to herself, I should have donut money turned in today. So at the end of the day, no donut money. She thought that was odd. She goes to the cheerleading sponsor the next morning and says, where's the donut money? I've got the bill from Krispy Kreme, but I don't have the proceeds where y'all sold the money. Oh yeah, I'll get that to you. Not a good answer. It should have been here. I didn't get by yesterday afternoon, but it's sitting right here waiting on you. So after some time, the cheerleading sponsor comes in and hands a stack of money. Bookkeeper goes through that pretty carefully and counts it all and notices there's a check in there for $600. I have eaten my share of Krispy Kreme donuts over my life, and I like them. Their location's just next to our office, pretty close, but $600 for donuts is pretty odd. Yeah, even with inflation, I don't think you can get there. So, and this is years ago. So the bookkeeper, doing her job, said that just doesn't seem right. Now the total worked, because if they bought them for $5, they sold them for $10, and she had the invoice for how many boxes they bought, and the money was in total correct. But then she remembered recently she had written a check to Tennessee Tech for cheerleader camp. And so she goes and pulls that fee, and it's $600. So she lists out everybody that was on the invoice she paid to Tennessee Tech. Let's say there were 12 girls. Then she went back to her receipt records and how many of those families paid, and there were 11. And so the one person who didn't pay was the same check she had in her hand. So what happened is the cheerleading sponsor stole $600 in cash from the donut sales, put it in her pocket, and then took this check that she hadn't previously turned in and put it in that bunch thinking she could get away with that. because the bookkeeper never compared the names of the cheerleaders that she paid Tennessee Tech for with who had reimbursed her. She thought the cheerleading sponsor would keep up with that. Well, she did. She knew she had one to play with. And so you can't steal a check, although we'll touch on that in a minute. You can't steal a check, but you could steal the cash and put the check in its place. And so through that bookkeeper told the principal, they called the central office, who called us. State investigators came in and found a little over $7,000 had been taken by that cheerleading sponsor. Back to you can't change a check in another county, and I don't sound like I'm picking on cheerleaders, I'm not, but a lot of these cases involve cheerleading programs. So the parents had written a check to, I'm gonna make it XYZ High School, and I think it was just the initials of the school. The cheerleading sponsor decided she would like to have cash instead of going and taking that check and depositing it in the bank at the school, so she writes dash Susie Smith. Goes to the bank, and the bank wisely won't cash that check because it's payable to the school, and she's handwritten probably like in a different color ink, because, I mean, why not? As long as you're altering the check, why be picky about it? So she writes that in. So, I mean, this is all being told to us. She writes that in. The bank says, we're not taking that. So she goes back to meet with the cheerleaders' parents. And I know how it ended up, but this morning I was imagining a conversation. I don't think she walked right in the door at that house and said, hey, will you do this? I think she probably walked in the house and said, oh, your daughter's quite a cheerleader. I've really, she should be at the college level, and she's doing so well, and she just got a gift for this, and so enthusiastic. Hey, by the way, that check you wrote me, I tried to get cash at the bank because, sometimes you need cash, and they wouldn't cash it. Will you care to just void this check and write a check payable to only me for that fee? And the parents did it. So how are you as a principal going to keep up when a parent would be complicit in a fraud by agreeing to write a check to somebody individually who she went and cashed it at the bank and then took that cash and did whatever she did with it? So there are a lot of moving pieces out there, but if you're aware of what's going on in your school, as I think you are, and you apply that back to what you see in your accounting records, there should be a correlation there. The case that we dealt with the state this morning on had one very unusual transaction, and I would tell you all this because I think you would react differently. When we talked to the bookkeeper about it, we said, we think $2,000 is missing. And the bookkeeper said, that's just not the answer you want when you tell somebody $2,000 is missing that they've handled. Because you want a reaction of, well, I don't know what you're talking about, or you're mistaken, or you're going to have to give me some details or something. It was just kind of like, oh, really? And so that concerned us that there was such a casual response to a pretty serious issue. But as the story unfolds, we asked how they price concessions, and they said, we mark them up 50%. I said, I've only been doing this 42 years. I have no idea what that means. If you buy something for 50 cents, what do you sell it for? $1. Okay, I think that's 100%, but it doesn't matter. Now we know if you buy it, you double the price, that's what you sell it for. And I said, so if you had $9,000 in concession cost, you should have $18,000 in income, more or less. And she said, yeah. Oh, okay. Well, so their gross profit percentage wasn't 50%, it was 21%. Problem being the prior year it was 57%. And so that told us, to the best of our knowledge, somebody was skimming money out of concessions. And we went through the whole drill before we tipped our whole hand. And the principal's in on this conversation. So do you give away anything you buy for concessions? Do you just sell that through the concession stand? Absolutely, every single time, okay? Anybody else besides you sell concessions? No, only me, okay? You try to give them every out, and then, no, the answer is nope, everything we bought, we sold. Did you have a lot of spoilage at the end of the year, things that went bad that you had to throw away? Nope, none of that. Just consistent inventory year to year. And so just boxed yourself right in a corner. But I think when everything's said and done there's probably about $13,000 of concession sales that have been not deposited with the school.
Did any of these stories fall under your definition of routine theft that you mentioned earlier?
They all, I guess, fall under that. There's, Yeah, every theft case is different. I may have misspoken to say routine, but yeah, every theft case is unique. The latest one on the state's website was, don't hold me to this, I think it's a daycare or something like that operates somewhat on a school year. So what caught their eye was there was a purchase made in July when school was not in session or the daycare wasn't open or what have you. So they went and looked at the receipt, which the person buying had lost, so they couldn't turn it into central office to get matched up to the credit card statement. Well, somebody or the other, the state investigators got it. So they had the receipt matched up, and right next to it was her child's 4th grade school supply list, which also came out in July. And so they could tell the items that were on that, you need to buy this for your child's class. Here's the receipt from Walmart where all that was purchased, only that got charged to this daycare provider and not this woman's personal funds. We've seen cases over the years where there's been wine purchased with the school credit card. And not only that, it was like $7 or something, which I'm not a wine drinker, but I got to think that's not real good wine at Walmart. It wasn't Walmart's top shelf stuff. The same person stole from the needy student fund, which I thought was particularly galling, but the people in the community really didn't care for that. But we'd seen the warning signs there. So I guess if I'm back to the good news part of this presentation, there is some good news, and that's that you have a manual that the state's issued. Julie actually had a hand in one previous version of it many years ago when you worked at the Department of Ed, but it is imminent that they're going to release a new manual, a new updated manual, first time it's been updated at least a decade, if not longer. It is absolutely chapter and verse as to how to administer internal school funds. And if you follow that carefully, then you really reduce the risk of you having a theft in your school that's material. Now again, somebody gets a parent to write them a check. There's nothing in the manual, there's nothing I'm going to tell you that's going to stop that. But you wouldn't think it'd be a whole lot of money. So when that becomes available, which should be in the next 30 days, we hope, you'll want to get that and get up to date, make sure your bookkeepers have got that. When I talk to bookkeepers, I tell them it's a good news, bad news thing. The good news is you have a manual that answers every question you've got, that tells you everything you need to do. And the bad news is you have a manual that makes you do all that stuff. But if you'll do that, so we kind of hit that angle with the bookkeepers. My angle to you all is you should be happy there's something out there that's that regimented, that's that prescriptive, because if they'll follow that and you'll review reports, be careful in signing checks, notice what you see around the school, then that's your best odds. It's something, everything being done fairly well. The other good news to report is that in doing audits for this many years, the auditing standards tell us to keep an element of unpredictability, I think is what it says, in the standards, so you don't do the same old procedures every year. Because there's the story of you go to do an audit and the client says, well, here's all the invoices over 5,000, you always want to see those. You know, at that point, then they know enough, they know what you're going to do. And so if they're going to do something, they're not going to do it for more than $5,000. So you try to mix your procedures up. We do that pretty carefully and consistently, not just in Anderson County, but in all the schools that we audit, the number of findings continue to go down. That worries me as a partner a little bit, that we're not being diligent enough as auditors, but we constantly have that conversation. And I think we are, so that's a credit to your bookkeepers and to your schools, because we tell bookkeepers this isn't just their domain. We tell them don't take findings against the school personally, because there's too many elements in there. If a teacher doesn't get a purchase order and goes and buys something, we have a comment on that. That's nothing the bookkeeper could have done differently. If somebody collects money and holds it for 3 weeks before they come turn it into you, you don't hit the 3-day deposit law requirement. There's nothing the bookkeeper could have done. So we try to encourage them, don't take these personally, because a lot of times there's nothing you can do about them. But the number of findings are dropping, so I don't think it's just the bookkeepers, I don't think it's just the principals, I think it's throughout the building. And so that's good, that's encouraging. We've seen this over the 30 years we've done school audits. Number of findings will go up, they'll go down, they'll go back up, they'll go back down, but they're kind of staying down. And so I'm encouraged that it's a variety of things. for our little small part of it, we're careful in that the message we give out to Anderson County or Sevier County or Campbell County is all the same. We tell them all the same thing as best we understand the manual. We communicate inside our firm, so we're giving consistent answers because we don't want to be contradicting each other. But I think a lot of the credit goes to central office, and Julie in your case, and Marcus, who are available to help people that have questions. And so where we've got that strong leadership at the central office, there are fewer and fewer findings. And then a couple of schools don't have that, and we have, more findings there. So that's some good news. At least the procedures seem to be being followed. I could talk more about this type thing, but just to give you the fraud perspective or what I hear as I've taken classes about this. So somebody created a long time ago a fraud triangle, and it's incentive, opportunity, and rationalization. So if all three elements are there, somebody can steal. Are they motivated, like they think they're underpaid or they're underappreciated or whatever? Is there opportunity that they have access to money? And then can they rationalize it? Because studies have shown 80 to 90%, let me back up, let me say it the other way, roughly 5% of the population is completely and totally honest under all circumstances, in every case, every day. 5% to 10% completely dishonest, they'd steal everything they can get their hands on. That leaves the 80% that it just depends on the circumstances. And I've heard instructors give presentations and nobody in the room raised their hand when he was done. When he describes a situation that you don't have money and your child's sick or needs medicine or your family needs food or something and you have the opportunity to borrow money, it's human nature. And studies have reinforced that time and again. So the controls are in place. You hopefully screen out and don't hire the 5 to 10% of chronically dishonest people. So they're not in your mix. So you're just trying to keep honest people honest. And so, and that's what all these controls and all these procedures are about. So that's kind of the big picture perspective. There's a lot of money. I should have looked this up before I came. Our largest county last year had $5.7 million go through the internal school funds. So Anderson might be slightly less than that because they've got a few more schools than y'all have got, but $4.5 or $5 million go through your schools, and a lot of that's cash. And so that's why there's a manual. That's why there's such scrutiny on it. But as I've done training sessions like this over the years, somebody pointed out to me, and I have to agree, there's so much focus on a school. In a community, the school building is probably the largest building there. And most everybody in that community's got a tie there. They went there, their children go there, their grandchildren go there. So there's a lot of scrutiny put on schools, which I'm not telling you anything you didn't already know. So that's why I think when there's a problem at a school, it gets a lot of attention. So there was a case years ago in Middle Tennessee where a woman, it wasn't a school, but it was a PTA, school support organization. She raised money, including raising money for a sick child. And when it was all said and done, she'd stolen $170,000. They showed us, in a class I was in, showed us a clip of her at the trial, and I'm as passive a person as you're going to meet, but I about wanted to, well, I better not say it since we're recording it. She was contemptible. Let's draw the line there. She would make you quite angry to see her and how she conducted herself. So as a result of that court case, there was a law, state law got changed about school support organizations, and now the state could come in and take a look at those. And so they found all kinds of problems in those. But it just again shows the scrutiny that's there. So right about the time that big $170,000 case was going on in Middle Tennessee, there was a case. So when that happened, I got my story straight now. When that happened, that was on the front page of the newspaper. It was a lead story on the news. There were letters to the editorial, letters to the editor. There were editorials written about it. What a disgrace, what a travesty, this is awful. And then a few months later, somebody stole $21 million from the state of Tennessee and some software that the state paid for but never got. And that was on like page 10. And it was not on the news. There were no letters to the editor, no editorials. It just, everybody expects the state to get stolen from. But when you steal money from students, then you've you've done it now. So I've seen this $7,000 that'll get splashed in the paper, and people get upset. So there's a lot different scrutiny paid to school support organizations and to internal school funds. So at that, and I'm kind of rambling in a sense, I've got notes, but they're mainly what I tell the bookkeepers. I'm just trying to give you, again, the 10,000 foot level. The law that was passed many years ago when that horrible woman did what she did allowed the comptroller to set rules for school support organizations. And rule number 1 was no board employee can have, you can't be the bookkeeper, you can't be an officer, you can't be on the board of directors of school support organizations. You can be a worker bee, but you can't have responsibility. I think the reason for that, I actually ran into firsthand at one of our audits. Went in and talked to the director of schools about something, and he said, I just had this awful meeting. And so the band director was also head of the band boosters at the time. This is 20 years ago. And the band director had left to go to another school in another county. The band boosters are there saying, we've got $7,000 of unpaid bills and no money in the bank. What are you going to do about it? Your employee took our money. And I asked the director what he was going to do. He said, I paid $7,000 worth of bills because I couldn't prove it wasn't my employee that took their money. So that was an example of where you can't allow board employees to be involved in the administration of school support organizations. There's a wall there. So make sure you're staying on the right side of that. I don't know how much y'all scrutinize those organizations. We've got a couple of counties that get those reports from them, and if they're sitting on a bunch of money and they want to raise more, then they're told no, you spend what you've got, unless there's a valid reason there. So you can't clamp down on them like an accountant would want you to clamp down on something, because they are volunteering their time to raise money to benefit the schools, but they got to follow state law like everybody else does. So be wary of school support organizations. Make sure they give you the reports they need to be giving you. They're supposed to have been approved by the board, years ago when that law passed. Just be careful there. The example we had, there was somebody came through town and went to local businesses and got them to give, $50 or $100 or $200 for a calendar, and you'd have your business name on there. And so they stopped by the school and tossed, 500 of those in the lobby. That probably cost them $500. And the $10,000 they collected from the community, they hit the interstate with that, went to the next county to do the same thing over again. And so businesses don't know. They think they're giving to help the school, but they helped this shyster that blew through town that collected all that money and gave the school, maybe giving a few T-shirts or something just for impact. But he got the bulk of the money and then went to the next county, did the same thing, and the next county after that. So it's the businesses in that situation that are really being taken advantage of. And this law helps step in to prevent that. You can't let somebody use your school logo without your permission. So things like that to be aware of. I've got, again, nuts and bolts here that I was going to cover at a pretty high level. Anybody have any questions just in general about what we've talked about so far? Nope. We've talked about fraud. We've talked about the scrutiny on schools, so I think y'all have got that. Cash receipts, sometimes we get misunderstanding about this. 3-day deposit law starts, as I did in my illustration a moment ago, from the time anybody in the building collects the money. So it's not like your bookkeepers have 3 days to get it in the bank from when they get it. It starts whenever anybody collects it. So I don't know why a teacher would hang on to money they've collected. If I'm a principal, I'm telling them you turn it in the day you get it. Because if they hold it, it either stays intact or it gets gone, or part of it gets gone. I wouldn't lock it in a desk, wouldn't carry it in a pocket or a purse. They just need to turn it in and be done with it. But they've got 3 days from the time anybody collects that. You want to make sure that you look at receipts, that they're being issued correctly to one person. They shouldn't be issued to third grade or to 2 or 3 teachers' names on there, and they should have a description as to what the collection was for. Check dates, we had a couple of cases just nodding in the recent years. Back to my example where the camp check was turned in for donut sales. In that same county, we had a question. They said it was May, and here's a check dated September, and it said like golf tournament. The child was trying to turn it in for some other purpose. So your bookkeepers ought to be looking at the checks that they're getting and make sure that the purpose and the dates line up with what they should have. Teacher collection logs, nobody likes those. The people that do like them are your bookkeepers, because if it wasn't for collection logs, they'd be sitting writing receipts for $1 and $2 and $5 to every child that had to come in and pay something. So I get that teachers don't like collecting it. I used to be nicer about it, but I kind of changed my mind when teachers say, well, I didn't go to school to fill out a collection log. Well, I didn't go to school to do half of what I do in a day's time, so I get it. Nor did y'all. So I get that, but that's too bad. Fill it out anyway. When we've seen money missing, we are sometimes able to trace that back to missing collection logs or ones that have been altered. And so we caution everybody, if you happen to be looking at collection logs and you see liquid paper or erasers or something like that on it, that's not good. Whoever does that ought to initial it, and it shouldn't be the bookkeeper, because we've seen where bookkeepers will get a collection log in that says $400 and make changes it's $300 now, and so then they pocket the difference and turn that in with the receipt for $300. So if a teacher can't fill the collection log out right, give it back to them, have them do it again. So, and again, nobody likes that answer, but to me, that's the right answer from an accounting standpoint. Athletic events, I think a lot of schools now are going to online ticketing. At least we've heard that, at least through COVID they did. I don't know if y'all are doing that or not. That seems to help with getting a lot of cash at the ticket office. If you're the principal, the manual that is getting ready to be replaced, I don't think this will change, but the manual says that the principal should be involved in the ticket reconcilement. Doesn't say you have to do it, but if you're not doing it, if you're a smaller school, you're probably in there helping tile that out. But if you're in a larger school, you want to see that report like the day after it's prepared. We had a situation in another county where we were auditing in September, October, and we noticed every home game the ticket money was short about $500 or $600. So that was odd. Go up and talk to the principal about it, and the current year he pulled the ticket reports and they were all short $500 and $600. And so he changed his ticket sellers, and all of a sudden they started balancing. But if the principal had paid attention to the very first one of those that showed up $500 short, raised questions, solved the problem then, they would have saved thousands that they got done out of due to lack of oversight by the principal. So again, it doesn't say you have to be involved in it, but it says you have to, it doesn't say you have to do it, it says you have to be involved with it. Cash disbursements, one of the big questions we get is about sales tax. Nobody wants to pay that. I get it. But the law is the law. So simply put, if the school is the end user, you don't pay sales tax. If you're not the end user, you do pay sales tax. So don't let the cashier at Walmart tell you you're a school, you don't pay tax. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. So we used to see this a lot with yearbooks and things like that, because people didn't want to pay tax on yearbooks, but you're not the end user, so that should have sales tax paid. I don't even think we look for that anymore because everybody kind of understands it. Where we see it'll be in concessions. So you may go to a Walmart or somewhere and buy your material for the concessions and have that, and then you run out of hot dogs or something. So somebody runs down to the nearest grocery store and buys something on the fly, and they say, well, you're a school, you don't pay sales tax. Well, you do if you're buying it for concessions. So be careful about that. If it's classroom supplies, something the school uses, then you would not pay sales tax for that. The version of the manual, not the current version, but the one that was 20 years before that, was a little unclear as to how the sales tax law applied. The version now was much clearer, and I would suspect it'll be even clearer with this one that's coming out pretty soon. You can't pay it directly or indirectly, so if a teacher's at Walmart on a Saturday and see something they want for their classroom, they got two options. They can buy it and absorb the tax that they have to pay because they're buying it individually, turn in and ask to be reimbursed only the item cost, not the tax. Or they can come to the school, get the tax exempt letter, purchase order, go down and buy it on a second trip down there and not pay sales tax. So if they made the decision to buy it while they're there, that doesn't make the school obliged to pay sales tax. So the manual says you can't pay it directly or indirectly, which means you can't reimburse it. I've gotten a few calls lately about teams traveling out of the area, And I think other states don't necessarily recognize sales tax exemption. A lot of times motel taxes or things like that will apply. If you try to get that waived and they won't waive it, then I just pay. We're not going to criticize you for that. The one area that comes up pretty often, which is a little surprising at this late date, is if you have an FFA class that sells fruit. For some reason, they don't want to charge sales tax in some counties. And so we know, because we've had the same comment for like 3 years, well, that's the first thing we do in auditing. You go find that invoice and pull it and see if they pay sales tax. They said, well, there's not enough profit margin in it for us to pay sales tax. Who sets the sales price? They said the fruit company did. Who are they to set your sales price? I mean, that doesn't work. Sales tax law doesn't allow an exemption if somebody else sets your price. So when you're selling fruit like that, it's a resale activity. You're not the end user. You should always pay sales tax on that. Purchase orders, yes,
Can you speak on school credit cards? You mentioned that a little bit ago. Can you speak on that a little bit, please?
I can. Hang on. The manual, it'll be interesting to see what the new manual says about that, because the old manual still talked about liquid paper and doing things in ink. So it's probably about 20 years out of date at this point. So I think what the new manual is going to say is schools can have credit cards if the board has approved a policy that allows schools to have credit cards. We've got a county that implemented that 5 or 6 years ago, and they have some strict guidelines. Like, there is a credit card in the office, you sign it out, you sign it back in with the receipt. If there's anything improper being purchased during the time you have the card signed out, you will pay for it and it will be deducted from your check. I mean, they've got very strict guidelines on that. I think they've got like a Visa or a MasterCard. I think what most people have is like a Walmart charge card or a Sam's or something like that, that you can only use at that one store. If you've got that, you've got to have control of it, and you've got to demand everybody turn in receipts. So that's a tough spot. I think more and more, especially ordering online, you've got to have something like that to be able to order that. That answer your question, or do you have anything specific? Because
Julie, does the county would the county let a school have a P card?
Doubtful, because the schools don't purchase through the county.
Yeah, so it would
No,
have
I
to,
would have thought of that anyway.
yeah, so we would have to look at a policy or something.
It'd have to be between the school and their bank, we'd have to do the board.
What about payment? And I know this is probably a bigger conversation, but like payment to school via cards and stuff, like for dues and parking passes and all those types of things.
I think the new manual is going to address that. So, and the reason I say that is when I've been at 2 sessions recently in the last year and a half, and a representative of the comptroller's office said, we're getting calls from booster clubs, school support organizations that want to use PayPal, online payments, Venmo. So that's what we need to raise money in the 2020s. Can we do that? And I think the comptroller said yes, don't hold me to that, but I think they said okay. And then that made them think, well, how can we allow school support organizations to do it, not allow schools to do it? And so I haven't seen the manual or haven't talked to anybody that's been involved in its revisions, but I would look for some improvement there, with the proper controls. At least what they came out with on the fly with athletic event tickets is you can use a ticketing service as long as nobody at the school is allowed to go in and void any transactions, and you can go in and print out a history of what happened. And if you can do that, then you can use this online ticketing service. So I think it's probably going to be something similar for credit cards and accepting online payments. So keep an eye out for that. Julie said that when the manual's available, she posted to the website. So just Marcus will post that to the website. Julie said Marcus will post that to the website. Last thing to mention on disbursements was make sure the fund sponsor's involved in buying things, so that if the cheerleader, or let's say Beta Club, wants to buy something, that the Beta Club sponsor has signed off on that. They've done the purchase order, they approved the invoice, and that's all that's done before it comes to you to have the check signed. If not, then I'd send it back. We hear a lot about donor's choice. I don't know if y'all have heard that or had some pushback in your schools. Currently, that's highly discouraged. That's in the audit manual that they issue for us, them and us, that it's strongly discouraged. It'll be interesting to see what the internal school manual comes out with. I think the issue there is you're paying a fee for something that you could probably get just as easily without paying that fee. If you're going to social media to raise money, why wouldn't you go to a school's Facebook page instead of paying somebody to do that for you and keeping 20%?
Well, I think when we talk about Venmo, that would also probably fall under that same, because Venmo takes a small portion. So if you had somebody paying you and you're collecting $30, it's not gonna be $30 when it comes to you. And will that make your books be?
You'll have to record that as a service charge of some type. I think if you're getting charged a transaction fee like credit cards inevitably have, that's one type thing, but I think like this Donors Choose or any of these sites are keeping like 20%. They're a fundraiser, and so they're gonna keep a chunk of whatever they're able to raise. When I first heard this years ago, it was, we need a lot of basketballs and volleyballs, and we're gonna put this online, and some rich person in California is gonna say, oh, I'm gonna buy a bunch of basketballs and volleyballs for a school in Anderson County, Tennessee. Maybe, I don't know why they wouldn't buy that stuff for schools in California. And maybe your community would buy that, but if they would, I bet they'd buy it if you put it on Facebook or you announced it some way. You don't have to pay somebody for that, right?
We'll go back to what Bill was asking about the cards. So we travel a lot at my school, and when we travel, we have to have hotel accommodations. So we mail the hotel a check. Well, that check may go to corporate office. So I've encountered two things with these checks, mailing them checks to secure rooms. Is one, it went to corporate office and the local hotel in Chattanooga, Nashville, wherever, says they haven't received payment, okay? So then here we are putting it on an employee's personal credit card, and then we have to get reimbursed because it did clear. We find out that the check did clear when we get back. Or we travel with a check in hand, but they won't let us stay until that check clears the bank.
Wow.
So we've got the check, but we can't stay because the check's not proven to be good.
That happens
So
all the time.
We're
And then
asking
then
employees to
employee
spend-
puts their card on it, now they can't get reimbursed the taxes.
Or the
Right.
principal.
On their personal credit card,
Right.
they're reserving those rooms and paying for those, and we're reimbursing them, but that transaction fee, that interest that may occur, whatever those things are, that employee is incurring that cost. So can we talk through that and see, well, what's the fix?
I think the new manual will allow schools to have credit cards for that reason. Because back, if you traveled 20 years ago, I don't think that was an issue. You just went with the school check. Of course it's good, it's a school check. But I think check fraud has hit such a level nowadays that they don't know that's a legitimate school check. I don't know how they don't know you're that school, but that's their policy. So I think the new manual will loosen that up a little bit, and pending board approval of a policy with having credit cards. Now I can tell you the reason the comptroller, I say this like I know the answer, I suspect the reason the comptroller's office is leery of loosening that up is that credit cards can be abused very easily. So if you do that, you need strict accountability on it, including making sure people get receipts. Going back to that example I had earlier, this person, oh, sorry, I lost a couple of receipts. Well, it turns out the ones she lost were the ones that incriminated her in buying something she shouldn't have bought. So I did years ago at a training session, one of the state investigators was doing a presentation, and a group utility, I think it was, had gone to stay in Los Angeles for a bond opening or training or whatever it was. Stayed at the Four Seasons, and it was $4,000 or $5,000, and said, well, we don't have a receipt. And he said, well, call them and get one, get a duplicate. And they said, we have, they just won't respond. And the investigator said it took him 45 minutes. And he had a receipt from the Four Seasons in Los Angeles that had filet and liquor and wine and all that stuff on it. So I think you can get copies of receipts. So, but I would, since you've never had credit cards and you're considering, if the manual allows this, board policy allows it, I would start with as strict oversight as you can imagine. And you can always loosen up a little bit if it's too
Richard,
tight.
that's gonna have to start with this group. That's gonna have to start at the top,
Absolutely.
the tight controls there.
Again, this one county, and I don't remember this verbatim, but there was something in the sign-out sheet that said, if anything goes wrong while I have this card in my possession, I will be personally responsible for it. And I bet when those employees come back from Sam's or wherever they've been, they run in the door and give that credit card back and sign it back in because they're trying to stop their potential liability. So you've got to put that kind of fear in people that there's repercussions if something goes off the rails. Other questions? So again, I wish, if we'd have known the manual, I thought it was going to be out by now and we'd have had a definitive answer on that, but I think it's, yeah. So, sorry we don't have a better
If it's
answer.
making reservations, most of that can be done online, so that card can be protected and locked up. It's never really leaving campus.
Oh, absolutely. And how do people do Amazon purchases?
You
Wouldn't,
can pay with a PO.
okay. And they bill you?
And there are some hotels now, we've been into the district level, that will take, they have a form for the card holder of what charges are and are not allowed on that card. Just room charges, what have you, kind of alleviates the issue of the card being there in person, because that's not who actually made the card. There are some, depending, it's like your whole thing with checks. And some hotels are like, yeah, great, have a great time, and the other ones, you know, want you to stay there on a personal card till the check clears. It's a hotel by hotel basis who does and does not allow that. Those things are out.
One thing kind of tying into that credit card issue, we've had a client who had check fraud happen to them, and so somebody was able to get access to their bank accounts. So a couple of things, warn everybody not to click on emails that you don't recognize, because I think that's what happened, and these bad actors, as they call them, got access to this person's email account. So the first thing they did was block any emails coming in from the bank. So when the bank was writing the CFOs saying, we got questions about this, she's never getting those. And then they were able to go online and make transfers out of the account before they caught that. So bank reconciliations should be done the day bank statements come in. Look at them, make sure that it's not just that check date and amount, but it actually cleared the check that you wrote, that pay didn't get altered. There's an article in yesterday's newspaper in Knoxville about that, and it's a big deal, and I don't know the solution for it. We had a client got clipped for $136,000, and it ended up in the Cayman Islands, and so I thought, well, sorry. But it ends up they were able to recover it, so that was some good news for them. And then, so they sent us all these checks. So here's the check they originally wrote. Here's the one that cleared the bank, and you can see there's a different payee, but everything else about the check was the same. Well, then they really started trying to clear checks through it. At that point, the check didn't even look right. It had one signature, not two. You know, it's just got the right routing number. That's all the bank looks at these days, apparently. So be very careful. That's why, almost to your point and yours, I think the comptroller's got to loosen up on this, because now there's an article in the newspaper that says, don't write checks. And so if you follow that, what option do schools have?
We had that here this year.
I got involved in that, or my school got involved in that check scam. They'd stolen the check. They had mine and my assistant principal's signatures on checks they were making. You've seen some of them. So we had to work with the detectives and we had to change our whole entire bank account, close an account.
Yeah.
Trying to operate a school day-to-day budgets when accounts closed for a week, everything gets backed up. That was a mess. That was difficult, but it was just from a check that somebody had made a copy of, and then they reproduced it.
Yeah.
And what they were doing was through Indeed. So they were calling these people and saying that they would hire them, and they were sending them the check to go cash it and deposit it into their account, and then deposit it back, and they'll send it back, send the money to them. They will send them the supplies, because it's supposed to be a work-from-home company. So they were gonna send them all the supplies they needed to get started. Well, what they were gonna do was capture those dollars, and the person that they received the check, we weren't gonna be out any dollars. The person that received the check,
Right.
deposited and sent the money back to them would be who would lose
Right.
the dollars. But it was just a big deal.
It was surprising. I have to think this through. So one of the things that's out there for large organizations is what's called positive pay. and that means the bank sends a list out that says, we're getting ready to clear these checks. Is that okay with you? And if you say nothing and they clear and one of them's fraudulent, you're out of luck. But now I think there's a thing called payee positive pay. So it's just not check number and amount, but it's check number, payee, and amount. And so this client that got clipped for the 100 and something thousand now has 3 people that get that email, and somebody responds by 10 o'clock every day. Where again, the person that initially had that responsibility just didn't do it. And again, the good news at the end is they got their money back, which was good. But one of the checks I saw, Joe Smith, apartment 212 Charlotte, some address, Charlotte, North Carolina. I think, does somebody go over there and knock on that guy's door? I mean, and then I just shows my I'm naive when it comes to that. No, that person never was there. I had some fake ID that probably went to a check cashing place. So it's a problem. It's a problem for all businesses, and I think schools, you write a lot of checks out there and people see that. So you've got to be on guard for that. But the number one control is to look at your bank statement. And conversation with the fraud investigator this morning, which we don't push this as auditors, but he makes a good point. Perhaps as principals, you want to get those bank statements sent to you directly. And so, or you just tell whoever opens the mail, give me that, don't give it to the bookkeeper. And what that does is allow you to see it. Well, that came back from our 1980, whatever, auditing days, when you got canceled checks back. And so when people would steal, they'd have a false check in there, and then they'd get the bank statement, take that check out. So if somebody sits and flips through the checks, they don't see the bad one. Nowadays, everything's digital, so you have to cut a square out of a page, which is pretty unlikely. But I still would probably, just for appearance sake, ask that the bank statement come to me directly.
So the way we discovered that, one of the persons that had received the check called me to ask what his duties would be, that I'd hired him for this position.
Wow.
Any idea what he was talking about. Then he sends me a copy of the check. We go through that. Not even match our check numbers. It's so out of sequence. And it wasn't even the same. It just had the school name on it. It didn't have the logo and the things that our check had on it. It was just a reproduction.
I think they're taking advantage that banks don't do like they used to do when, again, I started my career, they'd actually look at the checks that clear, and they're just not. When I can take my phone and take a picture of a check and have the money in my account in 2 hours, not a lot of scrutiny being put on that. So I think it's just the conditions we live in, something that we're going to have to continue to be diligent of.
Remember if that guy could teach math or English?
That's right. It's probably not a bad idea to start sending money out like that.
Reach back out to him.
The only other thing I had in my notes that we hadn't already covered is inactive accounts. So during COVID, we saw a lot of times when the activity just shut down. And so we didn't pay that much attention the last year or two. But sometime look at your financial reports as you're going through this review. If you have a French club that has $28 in it, nobody remembers the last time you had a French club, probably a good idea to close that out. And you can either close it into another restricted account or you can close it in the general fund. If there's still a sponsor around, they should sign off on that, but the odds are a lot of these accounts just don't have anybody connected anymore. If you are going to have a French club, there's nothing wrong with keeping it. But just be mindful that not to let a lot of accounts with small balances sit around after they've outlived their usefulness. So keep an eye out on that. Other than that, I didn't have anything else. So questions, comments?
I think you did some training earlier in May with all of our bookkeepers.
Correct.
So if you've got some bookkeepers that still need some questions, once the manual come out, you can come out and do some more training if you need to.
Well, again, you've got Julie and Marcus available in the central office to answer questions. We used to go out and we'd tell our clients, if you have questions, call us, and people wouldn't call. They were hesitant to call, and I think it's because we're the auditors. We can't overcome that hurdle that people are concerned about. They're telling on themselves, and we tell people we'd rather help you stay out of the ditch than to go pull you out of the ditch. And so, we tell the bookkeepers and principals, same thing, don't hesitate to call us, and we're happy to answer questions through the year. And that keeps us on the phone a lot or responding to emails a lot, but it also, I think, has a hand in keeping that number of findings at a pretty reasonable level. I think that's it.